And that's a very, very compelling way of working with movies. Two other things I want to mention about actual scene writing. One is that, like actors, have you gotten Audition? Have people ordered the book Audition? Yes?
Sorry?
So the book Audition was one of the suggested books that I asked people to get. Our actors may have read it because of auditioning. It's an American book written by a casting director who discovered people like Robert De Niro and Barbra Streisand. I'm actually going to hold up a copy. I have to figure out where the camera is. Ah, I found it for once. There.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it's called Audition by Michael Shurtleff, and it is also listed on the suggested readings in the syllabus, which you all got.
Yeah.
And it's easy to order. It's a $7 book, American, and basically it's a book written for actors about how to ace an audition, because what Michael discovered was that even if you were a good actor, sometimes the ability to make choices on your feet and be able to go in and take an audition were not the same gift as really being able to develop a role in rehearsal. So he came up with 12 guideposts for actors so that they could be handed what's called a set of sides. Karen, I know, is wincing at this point, going, oh, yes, those. And have enough techniques for a way to make enough of a character so you could get the part. And so I found, I don't know how I found this thing, but I found that by taking the 12 guideposts in the book and changing the word writer, okay, wherever I saw the word actor, I would change the word writer. Of course, murdering the syntax, but that wasn't the point. I got instant actor's craft. I mean, you know, obviously, Karen, not at the level of an actual person who does it, but enough of an insight as a writer to be able to learn to write lines and scenes for actors, much more important, okay? So everybody who's watching, this will give you a big leap forward, and I'm going to make a note that next week we'll talk about the first one. Let me know, shoot me an email during the week if you were able to get it. It's called Audition by Michael Shurtleff. Karen, you may actually have used it in another context. You may have it in your bookshelf. It's not a new book.
It's hard, but it's easy to get books through ABE Books, ABE.
Good. So perfect.
You've got to order everything from overseas.
All right. Well, you let us know. And
Okay.
Anyway, the most important thing is for Prabjot and for a couple of the other guys who are watching us, don't read any of the parts that aren't, because you might be tempted to get an audition and take an audition. You might do so well, you might get a job and never get your screenplay done. That's a true story that actually happened. One of my actors, because where I am in New York is I'm very near where they shoot all the soap operas. You know, I'm very near where Channel 7 is, and one of my students wanted to write a screenplay. Read the acting book, went and took an audition, and he's been on whatever the soap opera is ever since. So unless you want to get a part, yeah, don't read it. But anyway, it's a very useful idea. Now, a couple more things on general notes on screenwriting for people who are not that familiar. Number one, everything I teach is based on common sense, right? The American philosopher Emerson said we overlook common sense because of the word common. So I recommend that we take that back and we say, well, you know, if we're trying to figure out what's going to go in our scenes, why do characters speak? Okay, well, why do we speak? We speak because we want to get something, correct?
Yeah.
Right? No matter what it is, we don't open our mouths. We're just like animals. We don't bark or meow unless we want something. And when do we stop? When we get what we want or we know we're not going to get it. So when you're writing a scene, the scene starts not, hello, how are you? I'll be your waiter tonight. Here's your table. You simply write, you know, he and she were seated at their table after they ordered. Do you see what I mean? And go right into that. And start with, what is the dramatic question at hand? You know, will you leave your wife? You know, is it safe to go into the village? You know, what are you going to do when you get out of prison? You know, all right, now that you've been busted, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? You know, these kinds of, I mean, you want to pick scenes that are not necessarily the most ordinary scenes. So as an aside here, let me mention something that I do a lot of. You know, I work with as many novelists and nonfiction writers as I do with screenwriting, because the Horowitz System is about storytelling, you know what I mean? And it works for everything. What I tell my fiction writers, and I will say the same thing to you, is that the one rule here is that you don't want to show the audience anything more than they need. Does that make sense? And so your scene work needs to really respond, again, for our playwriting people, much more to the present, unless you're doing something specific. It's hard to say, do you remember 5 years ago when we were, walking up the River Kwai? You have to temper that by understanding that in screenplays you have the possibility to simply go there. And so you're always very, very aware that in your scenes the purpose of dialogue is to punctuate what we're watching. You see what I mean? You want to stay focused. Does that make sense? And I'm looking at Karen, who's our resident actress. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
That you want to reverse engineer your actor's craft to make your scenes more immediate.
Yes.
Yes, good. And for all of you, the main idea is that every scene has to rise to a crisis. So remember, I've talked about how everything happens in threes. Scenes also happen in threes. We have a beginning, we have the setup. So the setup is, interior restaurant night. Our two characters come in and they sit down, whatever kind of mood they're in, whatever. The part two is the conflict, the expansion. Hopefully, if the waiter is present, it's to make trouble of some sort. And whatever goes on in that expansion is the expansion. And then there's a summary, which does not necessarily mean the end of the meal. It can mean the girl stands up and throws water in the guy's face. It could mean that the place blows up, any number of things. But in that expansion, the scene must come to a crisis. The two people at that table cannot remain the same. Someone has to win and someone has to lose, or there was no point in writing the scene and you basically could pass on it. Some of what we do in the rewriting classes, we're going to identify a few of those scenes where you needed to write them for the characters to get to know each other, but they never really went anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I have nothing against writing what I call practice scenes, which is where you're having the characters talk to each other on paper to get to know each other. And then if something happens and it reaches a crisis, then cut out what's pretty much on the other side and stay with the meat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah?